The sound of cards slapping against the scarred wooden table was the only noise louder than Marlene Abbott's pounding heart as she watched her father lose hand after hand, his whiskey-soaked promises evaporating with each turn of the deck in the smoky Las Animas saloon. It was April of 1878, and spring had come to Colorado with a hesitant warmth that hadn't yet reached the dark corners of the Lucky Strike. Marlene stood in the shadows near the back door, her worn calico dress doing little to keep out the chill that seemed to seep up from the floorboards. She had turned 18 just 3 weeks prior, not that her father had remembered. Samuel Abbott hadn't remembered much of anything lately except where to find his next bottle and his next game. She watched him now, his hands trembling as he threw down another losing hand. The man across from him, a cattle buyer named Morrison with cold eyes and a cruel mouth, raked in the pile of coins with thick fingers. Her father's shoulders slumped forward and Marlene felt her stomach drop. She knew that posture. It meant the money was gone, all of it. "I'm out," Samuel said, his voice cracking. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying him with the casual interest of a cat watching a wounded bird. "Shame. I was just starting to enjoy myself." "I can get more," Samuel said quickly, desperately. "Just give me a few days." "We both know that's not true." Morrison's gaze drifted past Samuel to where Marlene stood. She felt his eyes travel over her like oil on water and her skin crawled. "Though I suppose you do have something of value after all." Marlene's breath caught. "No." "He couldn't mean the girl's not for sale," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Everything's for sale, Abbott. Question is, what's your price?" Morrison pulled out a leather pouch and coins clinked as he counted them onto the table. $40. "That's more than you've seen in 6 months." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Marlene felt her legs go weak. $40. The price of a decent horse, less than a good saddle. Her father was actually considering it. She could see it in the way his eyes fixed on those coins, in the way his tongue darted out to wet his lips. "Papa, no," she whispered, but the word came out strangled, barely audible. "I need that money, Marlene," Samuel said without looking at her. "You don't understand. I owe people. Dangerous people. So you'd sell your own daughter." The voice came from the doorway, low and steady. Marlene turned to see a tall man silhouetted against the fading daylight. He stepped into the saloon and she got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, dusty denim, worn boots, a hat that had seen better days. But there was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that made even Morrison glance up with interest. "This isn't your concern, stranger," Morrison said. "Maybe not, but I've got a counteroffer." The cowboy walked to the table, his spurs chiming softly with each step. He pulled out his own coin purse and counted $40 onto the table beside Morrison's pile. "I'll match your price. The girl chooses who she goes with." "That's not how this works," Morrison growled. "That's exactly how it works, unless you want to argue the point outside." The cowboy's hand didn't move toward his gun, but the threat was clear enough. Morrison was a bully and a predator, but he wasn't stupid. The cowboy had the look of someone who knew which end of a pistol to point. Morrison's jaw clenched. He looked at Samuel. "This you're doing." "I don't even know him," Samuel said, staring at the 2 piles of coins like they were salvation itself. "Then we have a deal," the cowboy asked Samuel directly. $40 either way, she chooses." Samuel's hands shook as he reached for the money, both piles. $80 total. Marlene watched in numb horror as her father's fingers closed around the coins. "Deal," he breathed. The cowboy turned to face her then, and Marlene saw something in his eyes that Morrison's had lacked: kindness, maybe, or at least humanity. "Madam," he said quietly. "My name is Kade Whitmore. I'm not going to hurt you. If you come with me, you'll be safe. You have my word." "And if she comes with me," Morrison said with an ugly smile, "she'll learn to earn her keep right quick." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Marlene's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'll go with Mr. Whitmore." Morrison's face darkened. "You'll regret this, girl." "That's enough," Kade said. He held out his hand to Marlene. "Come on, let's get you out of here." She took his hand. It was warm and calloused and steady, and let him lead her toward the door. As they passed the table, Samuel finally looked up at her. There were tears in his bloodshot eyes. "Marlene, I don't," she said. The word came out harder than she intended, but she couldn't find it in herself to soften it. "Just don't." Outside, the evening air was crisp and clean after the stale smoke of the saloon. Marlene took a deep breath, trying to stop her hands from shaking. Kade led her down the street to where a bay gelding was tied to a hitching post. The horse nickered softly as they approached. "What happens now?" Marlene asked, finding her voice. Kade reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, the receipt her father had scrawled and signed, marking the transaction. $40 for one Marlene Abbott. Her stomach turned looking at it. Her own father's handwriting, selling her like livestock. Kade struck a match against his belt buckle. The flame flared bright in the gathering dusk. "Now this," he said, and touched the match to the corner of the receipt. The paper caught immediately, flames racing across her father's signature, across the amount, across her own name written in his drunken scrawl. Kade held it until the fire nearly reached his fingers, then dropped it. It fell into Marlene's open palm, the last corner still burning. She felt the brief heat of it before it crumbled to ash in her hand, the wind scattering the pieces across the dusty street. "You're not property," Kade said quietly. "Not to me, not to anyone. That paper is gone. You're free." Marlene stared at the ashes on her palm, then at the man who had just burned away her sale. "I don't understand. You paid $40 for me. That's more than most people see in 2 months. Why would you just—" "Because it was wrong. Your father had no right to sell you, and I wasn't about to let Morrison get his hands on you." Kade untied his horse and checked the saddle. "There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it. She's good people. I can get you a room there for a few weeks while you figure out what you want to do." "I don't have any money. I'm aware. I'll cover it." "Why?" the question burst out of her. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Kade was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on his horse's neck. "About 6 years back, my sister got herself in a bad situation. Man she thought she could trust turned out to be something else. Someone helped her when she needed it, asked nothing in return. I never got the chance to thank them proper. Maybe this is my way of paying that forward." The simple honesty in his voice made Marlene's throat tight. She blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears. She'd cried herself dry over her father's drinking, over her mother's death 2 years ago from pneumonia, over the gradual loss of everything that had once made her life bearable. She thought she had no tears left. Apparently, she'd been wrong. "Thank you," she managed. "Come on," Kade said, his voice gentling. "Let's get you settled before full dark." The boarding house was a neat 2-story building with blue shutters and a well-tended garden in front. Mrs. Chen answered the door, a small woman with silver threading through her black hair and sharp eyes that took in Marlene's appearance in a single glance. Kade spoke to her in low tones, and Marlene saw money change hands. Then Mrs. Chen was ushering her inside, calling for hot water and a meal, asking questions in a brisk but not unkind way. Marlene looked back once and saw Kade still standing on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Will you come back?" she asked, surprised by how much she wanted him to say yes. "If you'd like me to." I'm working a ranch about 5 miles north of town. I'm usually in Las Animas on Saturdays for supplies. I'd like that. To thank you properly, I mean. Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. No thanks necessary, but I'll stop by all the same. Make sure you're settling in all right. Then he was gone, swinging up onto his horse and riding off into the dusk, and Marlene was left staring after him, wondering what kind of man paid $40 for a stranger's freedom, and then simply walked away. Mrs. Chen showed her to a small room on the second floor. It was clean and simple, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. After the cramped, dirty space she'd shared with her father above the livery stable, it felt like a palace. Mrs. Chen brought up hot water and soap, then a plate of beef stew and fresh bread. Marlene couldn't remember the last time she'd had a hot meal that wasn't watery soup. Mr. Whitmore paid for 3 weeks, Mrs. Chen said as Marlene ate. After that, we'll need to discuss arrangements. Can you cook? So, yes, madam, both. And I can clean, do laundry, tend a garden. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. Then we'll find something for you. I'm always needing help around here, and there are families in town who need household help. You won't get rich, but you won't starve either. It was more than Marlene had dared hope for. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Thank Kade Whitmore. That boy has a good heart even if he doesn't always show it. She paused at the door. Get some rest. You look like you need it. Marlene did need it, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the clean bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. Everything had changed so fast. This morning, she'd been her father's daughter, trapped in a life that was slowly crushing her. Now she was what? Free, Kade had said. But what did freedom mean when you had nothing and no one? She thought about the receipt burning in her hand, about the way Kade had looked at her with something that might have been understanding. He'd been there in her darkest moment and had given her a choice when she'd had none. That was worth more than $40. That was worth everything. Saturday came slowly. Marlene spent the week helping Mrs. Chen around the boarding house, learning the routines of the place. There were 6 other boarders, all men, a bank clerk, 2 ranch hands from spreads further out, a prospector, and 2 men who worked at the freight office. Mrs. Chen ran a tight ship, with strict rules about behavior and cleanliness. Marlene appreciated the structure of it, the predictability. It was the opposite of life with her father. She also made a point of staying away from the Lucky Strike saloon and anywhere else she might run into Samuel Abbott. The thought of seeing him made her feel sick and angry in equal measure. Mrs. Chen had mentioned, carefully, that Samuel had left town 3 days ago, heading east with his pockets full of money. Marlene told herself she didn't care. Mostly, she believed it. On Saturday morning, she helped Mrs. Chen with the laundry, then spent extra time with her hair, pinning it up carefully and changing into the one dress Mrs. Chen had given her that wasn't pure work clothes. It was a simple gray wool, nothing fancy, but it fit better than her old calico and didn't have any patches or stains. Expecting someone? Mrs. Chen asked, but her eyes were twinkling. Marlene felt her cheeks heat. Mr. Whitmore said he might stop by. Kade's a good man. Works hard, doesn't drink much, doesn't gamble. His ranch is struggling, though. Drought was hard on them last year, and the owner, Mr. Thornton, isn't the best manager. But Kade's loyal. It was the most Mrs. Chen had said about him, and Marlene filed away every detail. She wanted to know more about the man who had saved her. Needed to, maybe. Kade arrived mid-morning, his horse loaded with supply sacks. He looked tired but smiled when he saw Marlene on the porch. "Miss Abbott, you look well." "I am well, thanks to you." She stood, suddenly nervous. "Would you like to come in? Mrs. Chen made coffee, I'd like that." They sat in the boarding house parlor. Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes on them from the kitchen doorway until Kade raised his coffee cup to her in a silent salute. She sniffed but left them alone. Marlene wasn't sure what to say now that he was here. She settled on the truth. "I wanted to thank you again." "Properly? What you did, no one's ever done anything like that for me. Like I said, no thanks needed, but you're welcome all the same." Kade took a sip of coffee. "Mrs. Chen says you're settling in all right. She's been very kind. She's going to help me find work once the 3 weeks are up." "Good. That's good." He seemed to struggle with something, then set down his cup. "Listen, I know this might be forward, but I was wondering, would you like to go for a walk? There's a nice stretch by the river not far. Fresh air, open space. Might do you good after being cooped up all week." Marlene's heart jumped. "I'd like that very much." They walked through town and down to where the Purgatoire River ran silver in the spring sunlight. The cottonwoods were just starting to leaf out, and the air smelled of water and new growth. They talked as they walked, and Marlene found it surprisingly easy to talk to Kade. He asked about her life before, and she found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone about her mother, who had been kind and gentle and hadn't deserved to die so young. About her father, who had been different before the drinking took hold. About the gradual slide into poverty and desperation. "I used to think he'd stop," she said quietly. "That one day he'd wake up and be the father I remembered, but that day never came." "Sometimes people get lost in their grief," Kade said. "Doesn't make it right what he did to you, but maybe it helps to understand why." "Does it?" Marlene looked at him. "Does understanding make it hurt less?" "No, but it might make it easier to move forward, to not let it define you." She thought about that. "Is that what you did? With whatever happened to your sister?" Kade was quiet for a long moment. "My sister's name is Catherine. She's married now, living in Denver with a good man. Got 2 kids, another on the way. She's happy, but for a while there it was bad, real bad. The man who hurt her, he got what was coming to him eventually. The law saw to that, but Kat had to learn to live with what happened, had to decide it wasn't going to ruin her whole life. And you, did you have to learn that too?" He looked at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. "I had to learn that I couldn't protect everyone I cared about, no matter how much I wanted to. That sometimes bad things happen, and all you can do is be there to help pick up the pieces after." They'd reached a bend in the river where a fallen cottonwood made a natural bench. Kade gestured to it, and they sat side by side, watching the water flow past. Marlene was acutely aware of how close he was, of the warmth of his arm nearly touching hers. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "That day in the saloon you said you'd match Morrison's offer and let me choose. But what if I'd chosen him? Would you have really let me go?" Kade's jaw tightened. "I would have let you make your choice. But then I would have followed you, made sure he didn't hurt you. And if he tried, I would have stopped him, permanently if necessary." The certainty in his voice sent a shiver through her. "You would have killed for me, for a stranger." "I would have killed to stop a bad man from hurting an innocent woman. That's not quite the same thing." He turned to look at her. "But for what it's worth, you don't feel like a stranger. Not really. Don't know why." Marlene didn't know why either, but she felt it too, this strange sense of connection, of recognition, like she'd been waiting for him without knowing it. "How long have you been in Las Animas?" she asked. "About 1.5 years. Came down from Wyoming after some trouble. Nothing illegal," he added quickly. "Just personal business that needed settling. Mr. Thornton gave me a job when I needed one, and I've been trying to repay that ever since. Mrs. Chen says the ranch is struggling." "It is. Thornton's got a good heart but a terrible head for business. Bought too many head at bad prices, didn't prepare enough for the drought. Now he's in debt up to his ears." Kade picked up a pebble and tossed it into the water. "I've been trying to help, but there's only so much a ranch hand can do. What will you do if the ranch fails? Find another job, I suppose. There's always work for someone willing to work hard. Might have to leave Las Animas, though. He glanced at her. Would be a shame, just when I've found a reason to stay. The words hung between them, and Marlene felt her breath catch. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? She turned to face him fully. Kade, I know it's too soon, he said quickly. I know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is some cowboy getting ideas, but I'd like to keep seeing you if that's all right. Take things slow. Let you have time to figure out what you want. What Marlene wanted, she was discovering, was him. This steady, kind man who had saved her and asked nothing in return. Who looked at her like she was a person, not property. Who made her feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. I'd like that too, she said softly. His smile was like sunrise. Good. That's real good. They stayed by the river for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Kade told her about the ranch, about the horses he worked with, about his plans to maybe have his own place someday if he could scrape together enough money. Marlene told him about her dreams, small ones, she thought, but they meant everything to her. A place of her own, stability. Maybe a family someday with someone who would actually be there. You'll have all that, Kade said with quiet conviction. I know it. When he finally walked her back to the boarding house, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. Mrs. Chen was on the porch, shelling peas, and she gave them a knowing look as they approached. Same time next week? Kade asked. Yes, please. He tipped his hat to her, then to Mrs. Chen, and rode off. Marlene watched until he was out of sight, then turned to find Mrs. Chen watching her with an expression that might have been approval. That boy is falling for you, Mrs. Chen said matter-of-factly. Is he? Marlene touched her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. And unless I'm much mistaken, you're falling for him too. Marlene couldn't deny it. She was falling fast and hard for the cowboy who had burned her receipt and set her free. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that Marlene came to treasure. Kade would ride into town every Saturday, sometimes more often if he could spare the time. They'd walk by the river or sit in the boarding house parlor, talking for hours. He told her about his life growing up in Kansas, losing his parents to cholera when he was 16, taking care of Catherine until she was old enough to make her own way. She told him about growing up in Las Animas, about the mother she'd loved and lost, about the slow, painful process of watching her father destroy himself. You think you'll ever forgive him? Kade asked one day in early May. They were sitting on the river bank again, and Marlene had her shoes off, her toes in the cool water. She thought about the question. I don't know, maybe, not now though, it's still too raw. That's fair. Do you ever wonder where he is? What he's doing? Marlene shook her head. Not really. He made his choice. He chose whiskey and cards over me. I have to choose myself now, choose my own life. And what does that life look like? She glanced at him, suddenly shy. I'm still figuring that out, but I think I'm starting to get an idea. Kade reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he'd done more than offer his arm while walking, and the contact sent warmth flooding through her. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, gentle and sure. I hope I'm part of that idea, he said quietly. You are, you definitely are. He leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and perfect. Marlene felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. She'd been kissed before, by a boy back when she was 16, before everything fell apart. But this was different. This felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Kade's eyes were bright. I'm in love with you, Marlene. I know it's fast, and I know I should probably wait longer to say it, but it's true. Have been since that first day, maybe. Definitely since you told me about your mother's garden and got that look on your face like you were seeing something beautiful. Marlene's eyes stung with happy tears. "I love you too. I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or that you'd think I was just grateful. Are you?" "Just grateful? No, I mean I am grateful, but this is more than that. You make me feel like I matter, like I'm worth something. And when I'm with you, I'm not afraid anymore." He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. They stayed like that as the sun tracked across the sky, just holding each other, and Marlene felt a peace she hadn't known was possible. But peace, she was learning, was a fragile thing in the West. A week later, Kade came to town on a Wednesday instead of Saturday, riding hard and pulling up in front of the boarding house with his horse in a lather. Marlene heard the commotion and came out to find him already dismounting. "What's wrong?" "Thornton's selling the ranch. Got an offer from a big outfit out of Texas and he's taking it. Says he can't keep bleeding money." Cade's face was tight with frustration. "He told us this morning we've all got till the end of the month to clear out." Marlene's stomach dropped. "What will you do?" "There's work down in New Mexico or up in Wyoming. I can find something." "But Marlene," he took her hands, his grip almost desperate. "I don't want to leave you. I was going to wait, do this proper, but time's run out. Come with me. Marry me. We'll figure it out together." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Marry you? I know I don't have much to offer. No land, no steady job right now. But I love you, and I swear I'll work my fingers to the bone to give you a good life. Please, Marlene, say yes." She thought about the past month and a half, about the steady, patient way he'd courted her. About the way he made her laugh, the way he listened when she talked, the way he looked at her like she was precious. She thought about the receipt burning in her hand, about freedom and choice and the possibility of something beautiful rising from the ashes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." His whoop of joy startled Mrs. Chen's chickens in the side yard, and then he was spinning her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her properly, deep and sweet and full of promise. Mrs. Chen appeared on the porch, arms crossed but smiling. "I assume congratulations are in order," she said. "Yes." Kade called, "Good. You're both young fools, but you're young fools in love, and that counts for something. When's the wedding?" They looked at each other. "Soon," Marlene said. "Before the end of the month. Before I have to leave Las Animas," Kade added. "We'll find a preacher, keep it simple." It was simple, but it was perfect. They were married in the small church on the edge of town on a bright Saturday morning 2 weeks later. Mrs. Chen stood as Marlene's witness, and one of Cade's fellow ranch hands, a grizzled cowboy named Pete, stood for him. Marlene wore a dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew from pretty blue calico, and Kade wore his best shirt and string tie. The ceremony lasted maybe 15 minutes, but when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Marlene felt like her life was truly beginning. They spent their wedding night in Marlene's room at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen having tactfully given them privacy. Kade was gentle and patient, and if Marlene was nervous, he made her feel safe enough to let that nervousness fade. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Kade traced patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "I'm going to make you happy," he murmured. "I promise you that. You already do." "Happier then. Happiest," she smiled against his chest. "Where will we go?" "I've been thinking about that. There's a ranch up near Pueblo that's hiring. Owner's got a good reputation, pays fair. I sent a telegram last week, and he wired back yesterday. He'll take me on if I can get there by the 1st of June. Says there's a small cabin on the property we can live in. Nothing fancy, but it's ours." "Ours," Marlene repeated, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." They left Las Animas 3 days later, all their possessions packed on Cade's horse and a pack mule he'd bought with the last of his savings. Marlene said goodbye to Mrs. Chen, who pressed a package of food into her hands and told her to write when they got settled. "You're a good girl, Marlene Whitmore," Mrs. Chen said, using her married name for the first time. "You're going to do just fine." The ride north took 2 days, and they camped one night under the stars. Kade built a fire and made coffee, and they ate cold biscuits and jerky while watching the sky fade from blue to purple to black. Marlene had never spent a night outside before, and she found she loved it, the vastness of the sky, the sounds of the night, the feeling of being small but not insignificant in the middle of all that space. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, leaning against Kade's shoulder. "The owner's name is Robert Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, funny enough. He's got about 2,000 head of cattle and runs them on open range mostly. Good water, decent graze. He needs hands who know how to work cattle, break horses, mend fence. All things I can do. And the cabin. I haven't seen it myself, but Chen said it's sound. 1 room, but there's a stove and a decent roof. We can make it comfortable." Marlene thought about the little room above the livery stable where she'd lived with her father, cramped and cold and smelling of horse. Then she thought about the room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, clean but not really hers. The idea of a place that belonged to her and Kade, no matter how small, made her heart sing. It sounds perfect. They reached the ranch the next afternoon. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a red tile roof, and the outbuildings were well maintained. Cattle dotted the hills in the distance, and Marlene could see several cowboys working a corral near the barn. The cabin Kade had mentioned sat about 100 yards from the main house, small and plain but with a tidy look to it. Robert Chen turned out to be a man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. He shook Kade's hand firmly and tipped his hat to Marlene. "Welcome to the Double C. Kade, I'm glad you made it. We can use a good hand. And Mrs. Whitmore, my wife Alina, will be happy to have another woman around. Gets lonely out here sometimes." Alina Chen was a warm, round-faced woman who immediately took Marlene under her wing, showing her the cabin and helping her settle in. True to Chen's word, it was small but sound. The single room had a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a stove and shelves built into the walls for storage. The floor was wooden planks, and there were windows on 2 walls that let in good light. "It's not much," Alina said apologetically. "It's wonderful," Marlene said honestly. "It's the first real home I've had in a long time." Alina's eyes softened with understanding. "Then we'll make sure it feels like one. Come up to the main house tomorrow, and I'll show you the root cellar and the smokehouse. There's plenty to share." Kade started work the next morning, riding out before dawn with the other hands. Marlene spent the day making the cabin into a home, unpacking their few possessions and arranging things to her liking. Alina brought her curtains and a braided rug, some basic cooking supplies, and a basket of fresh eggs and vegetables from the garden. "Consider it a wedding gift," Alina said when Marlene protested. "Robert pays fair, but the first few weeks are always tight. This will help." That night, Marlene made her first meal as a wife fried eggs and potatoes with bread Alina had given her. It was simple food, but Kade ate it like it was a feast, praising every bite. They sat at their little table in their little cabin, and Marlene felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What's wrong?" Kade asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'm just happy." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "Good. Because I intend to keep you that way." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Kade proved himself invaluable to the ranch, showing a natural skill with the horses that impressed even the veteran cowboys. Robert Chen raised his pay twice in the first 3 months, and by August, They had enough saved that Kade started talking about maybe buying a few head of their own cattle someday. Marlene made friends with Alina and with the other ranch wives who lived on neighboring properties. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental stove, to make soap from lye and fat, to preserve vegetables for the winter. Her garden behind the cabin flourished, and she took pride in every tomato, every bean, every potato she pulled from the soil. She also discovered she was pregnant in September, just as the leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek were starting to turn gold. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but Alina confirmed it with the knowing eye of a woman who had borne 5 children herself. "About 3 months along, I'd say," Alina said, hands gentle on Marlene's belly. "Baby should come in March or April," Marlene told Kade that night, nervous despite herself. They talked about children, of course, but in an abstract someday sort of way. She wasn't sure if he was ready for the reality of it. She needn't have worried. Kade's face went through a dozen emotions in as many seconds: shock, joy, wonder, fear, and then joy again. "A baby, we're having a baby." "Yes, are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed and pulled her close. "Marlene, I'm terrified and thrilled and already wondering how we'll afford it, but yes, I'm happy. So happy." That winter was hard. Marlene's pregnancy made her tired and sick at first, and there were days she could barely keep food down. But Kade was patient and tender, bringing her dry crackers and weak tea, rubbing her back when the nausea got bad. And gradually, as winter deepened, she started to feel better. Her belly swelled and she felt the first flutters of movement in January. "The baby's kicking," she told Kade one night, taking his hand and pressing it to the spot. They sat in the lamplight, his hand on her belly, waiting, and then there. A little thump against his palm. Kade's eyes went wide with wonder. "That's our baby. That's our baby," Marlene agreed. She thought sometimes about her father, about whether he even knew she'd gotten married or was expecting a child. She'd heard through the gossip chain that he'd ended up in Denver and was still drinking himself to death 1 bottle at a time. The news made her sad but not surprised. And while a part of her wished things could be different, she'd made her peace with it. Samuel Abbott had made his choices. She'd made hers. The baby came on a warm April evening in 1879, almost exactly a year after that terrible night in the Lucky Strike saloon. Alina attended the birth, along with a midwife from the nearest town. Kade paced outside the cabin, wearing a track in the dirt, until Alina finally called him in to meet his son. Marlene held the baby tiny and red-faced and perfect against her chest, exhausted and elated in equal measure. Kade knelt beside the bed, his face full of awe, and carefully stroked the baby's downy head. "He's beautiful," Kade whispered. "You're beautiful. You're both so beautiful." "What should we name him?" Marlene asked. They discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Kade thought for a moment. "What about Thomas? After your mother's father," Marlene's eyes filled with tears. She told him about her grandfather, about the kind man who had died when she was 10. The fact that Kade remembered that he wanted to honor her family made her love him even more. "Thomas Whitmore, that's perfect." Little Thomas was a good baby, quiet and watchful. He had Kade's dark hair and Marlene's blue eyes, and both parents were instantly, completely besotted. Kade would come in from a long day's work and immediately reach for the baby, talking to him in a low voice about horses and cattle and the sky. Marlene would watch them together and feel her heart overflow. Life settled into a new rhythm. Marlene learned to manage the household and care for a baby while Kade worked the ranch. They were tired, new parents always were, but they were happy. Robert Chen proved to be a generous employer, raising Kade's pay again when Thomas was born and giving them extra supplies to help with the baby. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Kade had saved enough for a down payment on 10 head of cattle. Robert let him run them with the ranch herd and helped him register his brand, a simple KW in a circle. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The beginning of something that could grow into their own ranch someday. "Look at you," Marlene teased, watching him sketch plans for a ranch house in the dirt outside the cabin. "A cattle baron in the making." "Don't jinx it," Kade said, but he was grinning. "But yeah, maybe someday. A place of our own, more land, more cattle. A real house for you and Thomas. Maybe more kids if you'd want that." "I'd want that," Marlene said softly. She came to sit beside him, Thomas balanced on her hip. "I'd want all of that with you." The years that followed were good ones. Hard, certainly. Life on a ranch was always hard but good. Kade's small herd grew to 20 head, then 30, then 50. He took on extra work when he could, breaking horses for neighboring ranchers, occasionally hiring himself out for cattle drives when the money was too good to pass up. Marlene hated when he was gone, but she understood. They were building something, slowly and steadily. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. By the time he was 3, he could sit a horse with Kade holding him, and he knew the names of all the cattle in their little herd. Marlene discovered she was pregnant again in the spring of 1882, and their daughter Sarah was born that December, a tiny thing with blonde hair and a temper to match. "2 babies," Kade said, holding Sarah while Thomas climbed all over him. "We're a real family now." "We've been a real family," Marlene pointed out. "But yes, we are." In 1883, an opportunity arose that changed everything. The ranch adjacent to the Double C went up for sale, 500 acres with water rights, a small house, and decent graze. The price was more than Kade and Marlene had saved, but Robert Chen offered to loan them the difference at a fair interest rate. "You've been a good hand and a good friend," Robert said. "I'd like to see you get your own place. And honestly, having neighbors I trust would be worth the risk of the loan." They took the deal. It meant being in debt, which scared Marlene, but Kade was confident they could make it work. They moved into the house in March of 1884, when Thomas was nearly 5 and Sarah was toddling around getting into everything. The house was bigger than the cabin, with 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor. It needed work. The roof leaked, the floor was uneven, the windows needed replacing, but it was theirs. Kade threw himself into making the ranch work, running cattle and slowly building the herd. Marlene kept the house and the garden and the children, and helped with ranch work when she could. Money was tight, and there were times when they weren't sure they'd make it. But they did, month by month, year by year. By 1886, they'd paid off half the loan. Their herd was up to 200 head, and Kade had hired 2 hands to help with the work. Thomas was 7 and already helping with the easier ranch chores. Sarah was 4, wild and fearless. And Marlene was pregnant again, due in the fall. Their 3rd child, a boy they named James, was born in October. He was bigger than the other 2 had been, and the birth was harder. The midwife warned Marlene that she should probably not have any more children, that her body had been through enough. Marlene and Kade talked about it seriously, and decided 3 was a good number. They had their hands full as it was. James was a quiet baby, content to watch the world around him with serious eyes. He was different from Thomas's energy and Sarah's fire, but no less loved. Kade doted on all 3 children, teaching them to ride and rope, telling them stories at night, making sure they knew they were treasured. One evening in the summer of 1887, after the children were in bed, Kade and Marlene sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land. It had been 9 years since that terrible night in the Lucky Strike saloon. 9 years since Kade had paid $40 and burned a receipt, setting her free. "Do you ever think about that day?" Marlene asked quietly. Kade knew immediately what she meant. "Sometimes. Do you?" "Sometimes. I think about how different my life would be if you hadn't walked into that saloon, if you hadn't cared enough to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger." "You never were, not really." "No," Marlene agreed. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "But you didn't know that then. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped. Do you regret it? Any of it? Regret?" Kade looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Marlene, that $40 was the best money I ever spent. It brought me you and Thomas and Sarah and James. It brought me this life. How could I possibly regret that?" Marlene's eyes stung with happy tears. After 9 years, he could still make her cry with the simple honesty of his love. "I love you, Kade Whitmore." "I love you too, Marlene Whitmore. Every day, more than the day before." They sat together as the stars came out, and Marlene thought about freedom and choice and the strange roads that led people to their destinies. She'd been sold for $40 like property, like livestock. But Kade had seen her worth, had given her back her freedom and her dignity. And from those ashes, they'd built something beautiful, a life, a family, a love that would outlast them both. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and joys. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. By 1890, they'd paid off the loan to Robert Chen completely. By 1895, they'd expanded to 1,000 acres and 500 head of cattle. The children grew Thomas into a responsible young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Sarah into a spirited girl who could outride most of the cowboys, and James into a thoughtful boy with a gift for numbers and business. Kade's hair started to gray at the temples. Marlene found her first silver strand and laughed about it. They weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle diseases and market downturns. They buried friends and celebrated weddings and births. They fought sometimes about money, about the children, about the ranch, but they always came back together. The bond between them too strong to break. In the spring of 1898, Thomas married a sweet girl from town named Anna. They had a small wedding on the ranch, and Kade gave them a parcel of land to start their own place. Sarah, at 16, announced she wanted to go to Denver and work in a dress shop, horrifying her parents until they realized she was serious. They let her go, with strict conditions and regular letters home. James, at 12, was already showing a head for business, keeping the ranch books and suggesting improvements that actually worked. On their 20th anniversary, Kade surprised Marlene with a trip to Denver. They left the ranch in Thomas's capable hands and took the train north, staying in a real hotel and eating in restaurants, and doing all the things they'd never had time or money for when they were young. It was wonderful, but what Marlene loved most was the train ride home, sitting close to Kade and watching the familiar landscape roll past. "Ready to be home?" Kade asked. "Always," Marlene said. "Our home, our land, our family, that's where I belong." As the new century dawned, the Whitmore Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the region. Kade was known as a fair boss and an honest dealer. Marlene was known for her kindness and her beautiful garden. Their children were making their own ways in the world. Thomas and Anna had given them 2 grandchildren. Sarah had found success and happiness in Denver, and James was talking about going to college to study agriculture and business. On a warm April evening in 1905, Kade and Marlene sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they'd done 1,000 times before. They were in their late 40s now, still healthy and strong, but starting to feel the accumulation of years and hard work. Kade's hands were gnarled from arthritis. Marlene's back ached on cold mornings, but they were together, and that was what mattered. 27 years, Marlene said. Since that night in Las Animas. Best 27 years of my life, Kade said, even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. Those are what make the good parts so sweet. Marlene leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you ever wonder what happened to Morrison? Or to my father? Morrison got himself shot in a card game, from what I heard, about 10 years back. As for your father, Kade hesitated. I heard he died in Denver, 5, maybe 6 years ago. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure you'd want to know. Marlene was quiet for a long moment. She felt sad but not devastated. Samuel Abbott had been a stranger to her for a long time now. I'm glad you told me. He deserves to be remembered, even if he made terrible choices. He was my father once before the drinking. He gave me you, Kade said. In the most twisted, terrible way possible, but still, if he hadn't been in that saloon that night, we might never have met. It was a strange thought that something so awful could lead to something so beautiful. But that was life, Marlene supposed. Light and dark, joy and sorrow, all tangled together. What mattered was what you did with it, how you chose to move forward. I'm grateful, Marlene said, for all of it. Even the hard parts, because they brought me here to you, to this life. Me too, Kade said softly. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out and then went inside to the home they'd built together, the life they'd fought for, the love that had sustained them through everything. The years continued their relentless march. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Kade's arthritis worsened. Sarah came home from Denver with a husband, a banker who was willing to relocate to Colorado for her. James did go to college and came back with new ideas about breeding and range management that modernized the ranch. More grandchildren came, 6 in total by 1910, with the promise of more on the way. Kade and Marlene became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family. They hosted Sunday dinners where the house overflowed with children and grandchildren, laughter and noise and life. They sat in rocking chairs on the porch and dispensed advice and love in equal measure. They watched their children become parents, watched their grandchildren grow, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. On their 40th anniversary in 1918, the family threw them a party. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was food and music and dancing. Thomas gave a speech about what his parents had taught him. Sarah sang a song she'd written. James presented them with a photograph, the whole family, 3 generations, posed in front of the ranch house. That night, after everyone had gone, Kade and Marlene looked at the photograph together. Their faces were lined now, their hair white, but their eyes still held the same love that had bloomed in those early days by the Purgatoire River. Look at what we made, Marlene whispered. Look at all of this. I am looking, Kade said, and I see you. I see the strong, brave woman who took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but $40 and a dream. I see the mother who raised these beautiful children. I see the partner who built this ranch with me. I see everything I've ever loved, right here in this photograph. Marlene turned to him, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. You gave me my life back that day. You gave me freedom and choice and love. You gave me everything. You gave me purpose, Kade said. You gave me a reason to be better, to work harder, to dream bigger. We gave each other everything, Marlene. They held each other as the night deepened around them. 2 old people who had loved each other through poverty and prosperity, through hardship and joy, through every twist and turn of 40 years together. Kade died in the winter of 1922, in his sleep, with Marlene beside him. He was 68 years old and had lived every day of his life with purpose and love. The funeral was huge, attended by what seemed like half of Colorado. Cowboys who had worked for him, families he'd helped, Friends he'd made over a lifetime, they all came to pay their respects to a good man. Marlene stood at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and watched them lower her husband into the ground. The grief was crushing, a physical weight on her chest. But even through the pain, she felt grateful. She'd had 44 years with him, 44 years of love and partnership. So many people never got even 1 year like that. Thomas took over the ranch completely. Sarah and her husband moved into the main house to help care for Marlene. James brought his wife and children to visit every weekend. They were all worried about her, about how she would cope without Kade. And yes, the days were harder, the nights lonelier. But Marlene had never been one to give up. She kept her garden, though her knees protested the weeding. She played with her grandchildren and taught them the things she'd learned over a lifetime. She sat on the porch in the evenings and talked to Kade like he was still there, telling him about her day, about the children, about the 1,000 small things that made up a life. And sometimes, on clear nights when the stars were bright, she thought about that moment in Las Animas when everything changed. When a cowboy with storm-gray eyes walked into a saloon and really saw her not as property but as a person. When he paid $40 and burned a receipt, setting her free to become everything she was meant to be. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, to Kade, to whatever force had brought them together. "Thank you for everything." Marlene lived to be 81 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1932. She was buried beside Kade on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. At her funeral, her children and grandchildren and now great-grandchildren gathered to remember a woman who had been sold for $40 and had turned that terrible moment into a legacy of love. Thomas, now 60 and gray-haired himself, stood beside the grave and told the story one more time. The story of how his father had walked into a saloon and saved his mother. How they'd built a life from nothing, how they'd loved each other through everything, how they'd created something that would outlast them both. "They taught us that love is a choice," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "That every day you choose to show up for the people you care about. That hardship doesn't have to define you. That from the darkest moments something beautiful can grow. That's their legacy. That's what they gave us." The Whitmore Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations. The story of Kade and Marlene became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The receipt that had been burned was never forgotten. It became a symbol of freedom and love, of choosing to see people as they truly are, of building something lasting from the ashes of despair. In the years that followed, their descendants would sometimes stand on that hill and look out over the land. They'd think about a desperate young woman and a compassionate cowboy. They'd think about $40 paid and a receipt burned. They'd think about a love story that began in the darkest moment and grew into something that touched hundreds of lives. And they'd understand, in the way that only comes with time and distance, that some loves are too powerful to be contained by a single lifetime. That the best legacies are measured not in money or land, but in the people whose lives are changed by love. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is see someone when they need to be seen, help someone when they need help, and love someone with everything you have. Kade and Marlene Whitmore had done all that and more. They'd taken a moment of terrible injustice and transformed it into a love story for the ages. They'd built a family, a ranch, a life that mattered. And long after they were gone, their love continued to echo through the generations, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the choice to love against all odds. The ranch house still stands, weathered but strong. The garden still blooms each spring, tended by new hands but remembering old ones. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows just right across the Colorado hills, you can almost hear it, the echo of laughter, of children playing, of two people who loved each other enough to build a world. From $40 and a burned receipt, an empire of love was born. And that love, that choice, that moment of compassion in a smoky saloon, it changed everything. It created a family, a legacy, a story that would be remembered as long as the Whitmore name endured. In the end, that's what matters. Not the money or the land or even the hardships overcome, but the love, always the love, the kind of love that sets people free, that builds them up, that creates something lasting and beautiful. The kind of love that Kade and Marlene found in each other and shared with everyone lucky enough to know them. Their story began with a transaction meant to strip away humanity and dignity. But it became something else entirely, a testament to the truth that people are not property, that freedom is sacred, that love can transform even the darkest moments into light, that a cowboy with $40 and a good heart can change a life, and that a woman given the chance to choose can build an empire. And so the story ends where it began, not in a saloon, not in Las Animas, but in the hearts of everyone who heard it and understood. Love wins. Choice matters. People are worth saving. And sometimes, burning a receipt is the most revolutionary act of all.